In the early 20th century, massive waves of immigrants arrived from Eastern Europe, Southern Europe, and Asia. Then, that open door slammed shut. These newly arrived groups stepped into a period of domestic anxiety. The post-World War I recession had damaged the economy, and the first Red Scare had fueled fears of foreign radicals migrating to undermine American values. American workers and labor unions saw this influx of cheap immigrant labor as a direct threat to their livelihoods. They lobbied the government, arguing that more immigrants would worsen the unemployment rate and undercut local wages. The U.S. government faced a specific problem. Politicians wanted to stop the flow of nationalities they deemed undesirable, but they needed to figure out how to target those specific groups without entirely shutting down immigration for everyone else. The underlying goal of the 1924 legislation was explicitly demographic. The State Department noted the objective was to preserve U.S. homogeneity, an effort to engineer a white, Northern European, and Nordic demographic majority. This restrictionist push drew support from a broad coalition. It included xenophobic groups like the Ku Klux Klan, but it also relied heavily on mainstream academic advocates for eugenics, the belief that the American population should be improved by restricting certain ethnicities to prevent the spread of feeble-mindedness. Even prominent immigrant labor leaders backed the restrictions to protect local union wages. Samuel Gompers, founder of the American Federation of Labor, supported the laws despite knowing the act would sharply reduce Jewish immigration. Lawmakers now face the task of turning subjective, racist ideology into an objective, enforceable federal mechanism. For Asia, the mechanism was blunt. The law instituted a total geographical ban on all immigrants from the continent, expanding on previous exclusion laws that had already barred Chinese and Japanese laborers. This sparked immediate international fury. The Japanese government warned of grave consequences, seeing the law as a move to single out their nation and stigmatize their people as unworthy in the eyes of the American public. The national origins formula was used to handle European immigration. Pitched as an objective mathematical mechanism, a country's annual limit was capped at exactly 2% of the number of foreign-born persons of that nationality already residing in the United States. By tying future immigration allowances directly to past population counts, the government created a closed demographic feedback loop. But there was a trick to the math. Instead of using the most recent 1920 census for their 2% calculation, lawmakers deliberately chose the 1890 census. This bar chart shows the makeup of the 1920 U.S. population. You can see large columns representing newly arrived Italians, Jews, and Eastern Europeans. But back in 1890, those specific immigrant groups had not arrived yet in large numbers. That earlier data was heavily skewed toward Germans and Britons, allowing the law to favor Northern Europe while legally choking off the rest of the continent. To enforce these new quotas, the U.S. established a consular control system. This bureaucratic layer required immigrants to obtain a valid visa from an American consulate abroad before they were allowed to board a ship. And to guard this fortified paper wall, the law authorized the creation of the country's first formal land border enforcement, the U.S. Border Patrol. By weaponizing an outdated spreadsheet, the government successfully laundered a eugenics agenda through the language of mathematics. This graph shows the statistical impact. Emigration from targeted nations collapsed instantly. Italian arrivals fell from hundreds of thousands to 4,000. The geopolitical timing was tragic. The 1890 math halted Jewish migration from Eastern Europe just before Nazi Germany's rise. There was also domestic economic damage. The loss of Eastern and Southern European scientists led to a drop in U.S. patents, while the mining and farming industries contracted because they could no longer rely on migrant labor. The Asian ban specifically singled out Japan, and indignity diplomats warned would stigmatize their people as unworthy in American eyes. By shattering the cordial relationship with the West, the act effectively silenced Japan's pro-Western democratic movement and cleared the path for militarist control. Closing the door isolated America, but it also left millions of refugees trapped on the wrong side of a mathematical wall. The law quickly became admired by other xenophobic regimes. In 1928, Adolf Hitler explicitly praised the U.S. quotas for banishing strangers of the blood. President Calvin Coolidge signed the act into reality, and it would go on to dictate U.S. demographic policy for the next 40 years. The national origins formula was eventually abolished by the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965. While the 1890 quota trick was erased from the books, the bureaucratic machinery it birthed, visas, consular controls, and the Border Patrol, remains the foundation of the modern American border today.